This is a video for the Attic Inscriptions in UK Collections project as part of our series about the Greek stone inscriptions from Athens in the Ashmolean Museum, Oxford. Today we're asking Lisle about the history of this collection. What do we know about how these inscriptions were acquired and why they ended up in the Ashmolean?
The Attic inscriptions in the Ashmolean were brought to Britain in the 17th and 18th centuries. This is earlier than other UK collections, which were mostly formed in the late 18th and 19th centuries. The collectors of the Ashmolean inscriptions were some of the earliest British travellers to Greece, keen to learn about the ancient world and to possess its artefacts. The history of the collection is an important chapter in the history of classical scholarship in Britain.
Who were these collectors?
There are three of them: William Petty, George Wheler, and James Dawkins.
What do we know about William Petty?
William Petty travelled around the Aegean from 1625 to 1626, acquiring Greek artefacts for the collection of Thomas Howard, Earl of Arundel, known as the Arundel marbles. This portrait of Arundel, pointing out his collection, shows the enormous social cachet that he gained from owning these artefacts, which symbolized his mastery of classical learning. We don't have any writings by Petty, but several letters about him by the Earl of Arundel and Thomas Roe, the English ambassador to Constantinople, survive. These letters show that it was hard work. According to Roe, Petty encounters all accident with so unwearied patience, eats with Greeks on their worst days, lies with fishermen on planks at the best. It was also cutthroat. When another buyer was thrown in jail, Petty bought all of his acquisitions from his jailers and sent them back to Arundel.
What were the local attitudes to the purchase of antiquities?
We know little about the opinions of local inhabitants on these collectors' activities. Roe claims that inhabitants of the Ottoman Empire were uninterested in the remains of the Hellenic past, or actively hostile to them on religious grounds. Yet he also complains about local resistance when he tried to remove items. For example, when Roe tried to remove the sculptures on the Porta Aurea in Constantinople by bribing religious authorities to denounce them as graven images, the people of Constantinople rioted against their removal, claiming that a prophecy predicted that the city would fall if the statues were removed, something Roe dismisses as a strange conceit and a superstition, and he was forced to give the venture up. For Roe, Petty, and Arundel, these artefacts were windows into a classical heritage that had been lost and might now be reclaimed. For local inhabitants, they were part of contemporary life.
What sort of artefacts were Petty and Arundel interested in?
In his letters, Roe often expresses confusion about what made an item valuable to a collector such as Arundel, but the main criteria seem to have been beauty and antiquity, as he says. Thus, most of the collection was sculpture. The only Attic inscription, this ephebic dedication discussed in an earlier video, was probably acquired for its relief sculpture, not its inscription. However, some inscriptions from other parts of the Greek world were among Petty's haul, including this fragment of the Parian marble, a chronological inscription which scholars hoped would improve their understanding of ancient history and allow them to calculate the date of the creation of the earth.
What happened to the Arundel marbles once they reached England?
The collection was used to decorate the Earl of Arundel's house and garden. Due to inheritance disputes and the English Civil War, the collection was neglected after the Earl's death in 1646. Part of the Parian marble was even used to repair a chimney. Several other items were also lost before the Earl's grandson donated the collection to Oxford University in 1667.
What about George Wheler?
George Wheler arrived at Lincoln College in Oxford as a student a year after the donation of the Arundel marbles. His main interests were botany and theology, but he studied law because his family was enmeshed in a difficult legal dispute over an inheritance. After winning the dispute, he set out in 1673 on a grand tour.
A grand tour was a journey that many wealthy young men undertook in the 17th and 18th centuries to see the art and classical remains of Europe, especially Italy.
For many, it was an excuse to party, but Wheler took the academic side very seriously. In Rome, he met a kindred spirit, a French scholar of ancient Greece called Jacob Spon. In 1675, the pair decided to travel on to Greece. This was not an ordinary part of the Grand Tour itinerary. At the time, Western European knowledge of Greece was minimal. Some people believed that Athens was no longer even inhabited. Wheler's Journey to Greece, published in 1682, was the first eyewitness account of Greece ever to be published in English.
Did Wheler and Spon engage much with inscriptions?
Wheler recorded and sketched a vast range of things: antiquities, plants, even beehives, but inscriptions held a special interest, and the pair transcribed over 1,000 of them on their travels. In Athens, Wheler bought 9 inscriptions, some gravestones, including the stela of Philodemus and Lysimache, discussed in an earlier video, and several inscriptions relating to the alphabet, the Athenian system of education for male youths. Inscriptions about education were particularly fitting, since Wheler intended to donate these inscriptions to Oxford University as thanks for the education he had received there. These ephebic inscriptions consist of long lists of names and official positions. This type of inscription particularly interested Wheler, Spon, and their contemporaries, because they could use them to, for example, confirm the order of the ancient Athenian months, and produce full lists of Athens' demes, that is, the local villages. Collecting and systematizing data in this way was a preoccupation of scholarship at the time. Wheler took the same approach in recording the plants that he saw on his travels.
Who was James Dawkins?
Dawkins is best known for his journey through the Eastern Mediterranean in 1750 and 1751, the first Western European expedition to visit the ruins of Palmyra, fancifully depicted in this painting. No expense was spared. Dawkins bought his own ship, and when told that the path to Palmyra was full of bandits, he paid for a contingent of the Ottoman army to act as escort. All of this was funded from the proceeds of his sugar plantation in Jamaica, which employed slave labour. On the way back from Palmyra in 1751, the expedition visited Athens and collected 5 inscriptions. The diary of Robert Wood, one of Dawkins' fellow travellers, describes how they stopped to scope out churches and mosques as they travelled through the Attic countryside, looking for inscriptions that had been reused as building material, and paid local villagers to remove them and ship them home. A similar approach seems to have been taken in Athens, where several of Dawkins' inscriptions derive from churches belonging to a single monastery. The resulting collection is much more eclectic than that of Wheler, consisting of a decree, an altar, a calendar, and 2 hymns. They were donated to Oxford University after Dawkins' death in 1757.
What happened to these inscriptions once they reached Britain?
When the first inscriptions and sculpture were donated to the university in 1667, they were displayed outside in a garden of antiquities, in a set of niches in a wall surrounding the Sheldonian Theatre. This was the first time that a collection of ancient artefacts had been placed on public display in Britain. This wall, however, was demolished in 1712, and the artefacts were moved into the Bodleian Library, which contemporaries describe as dark and overcrowded. After the new Ashmolean Museum was built in 1845, the inscriptions were moved there. The inscriptions were published very early. Arundel's inscriptions were already published in 1628, only a year after they arrived in Britain. The others appeared in Richard Chandler's Marmora Oxoniensia in 1763, a sumptuous volume which observes most of the best practices of modern epigraphic publications, carefully distinguishing the text on the stone from the epigrapher's restorations, noting provenance, and providing clear images, like this print of the Decree for Straton. Today, 5 Attic inscriptions are on display and another 11 are kept in storage, making the Ashmoleans the second largest collection of Attic inscriptions in the UK, after that in the British Museum.
We have published a full account of the collection's history in AIUK Volume 11, linked in the description below. For more information on individual inscriptions in the Ashmolean, please watch our other videos.